Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back. Today we're going to be doing a really cool paint job on this badass 7-string guitar. So what I've got here is a 7-string ESP Viper, I believe, with some active pickups in it. I wish I were good enough to play it, but anyway, it's got a matte finish on it. You can see it's got a few rubbed out spots, but that's pretty typical of a matte finish guitar that's been loved a little bit, so to speak. Yeah, it's a pretty neat guitar. I like the stealth finish, but today we're going to mess with that a little bit. We're going to do something a little more interesting. What I'm going to do is pull off some hardware. These pickup covers are also matte, so I might include them in the paint job. Get the strings and the hardware off of here. Get this stuff out of the way. We're going to avoid taking this apart completely. We'll tape it up, and I'm just going to do a cool pattern on the front. So playing off of this matte finish, what we're going to do on the front is a pattern in some gloss. You can do this. It's going to be a pretty straightforward technique. I don't really have anything planned. I'm just going to kind of abstract it, probably maybe include a couple images. And it's all just going to be a matte and glass pattern finish. I'm going to start by scuffing this up a little bit, clean it, and then put some tape on there to mask it off. You can do this with spray cans. You can use a gloss spray can if you want, a gloss lacquer, or gloss enamel, gloss polyurethane, depending on what finish is on your guitar and what you're looking for. I'm going to be doing it with a catalyzed polyurethane out of a spray gun because I want it to be as nice and as durable as possible. Now keep in mind, when you do this, there's really no good way around it unless you're using a very, very thin lacquer coat. You're going to feel ridges after, so you're going to feel where your bottom matte finish transitions into your gloss. If you're wondering about the general principles of this, how to get your matte finish to start with and all of that, I have a video out on how to get a matte finish with spray cans, and I've also got a video out on how to do matte and gloss patterns. So check those out for background if you don't really know what I'm doing here. But if you're just along for the ride or you're looking for some cool ideas, let's get started on this guitar, shall we? Alright, so if you don't know your way around the various parts on a guitar, don't just toss them all in a little bucket like I'm going to do. Keep them organized, label them, take pictures of them if you need to when they're installed so you know where they go back in. When I first started doing this, I kept them in separate Ziplocs. And that kind of stuff is especially effective when you're taking apart, like a fender or something like that, and you've got 50 friggin' screws to hold in the pick guard. Because the screws, after a while, they all kind of look the same. If you don't really know what you're doing, it's easy to get them mixed up. On this guy, not only is this guitar pretty straightforward as far as disassembly, I'm not taking it apart all the way. And let's be honest, I've been doing this for a while, so I should be able to figure it out. If I can't, that's on me, and I'm the one who's going to look dumb. But I don't want you guys messing it up because I didn't tell you that. It's, that is on there pretty good. Alright, we'll save that for after. Like I mentioned, I'm not taking this thing apart all the way, per se. I'm just kind of taking off enough so that I can do the top. Ow! Here I was trying to undo a string, and the end of it snapped. I guess I should be wearing goggles. Wear goggles. How about that? That's lots of fun. Alright, well, the string comes off quicker when that happens, at least. You guys are, I'm sure, well aware of how to store your strings properly. I think the problem might have been that I wasn't paying attention that time, and I was tightening it instead of loosening it. What an idiot. Alright, well, I can't complain. That's entirely my fault. When you go to do this, make sure you've got something clean to put your guitar on. Something like a towel works just fine, of course. I've just got essentially a piece of vinyl backing paper here. The string left a mark on the back of my hand. And I'm going to take these strings off camera because it takes a while and I don't have the tool at the shop right now to be able to do it quickly. And then when we come back, I will show you how to store them and throw them into the garbage so that they are not going to be a pain in the ass, not going to take up too much space, and not going to hurt you or take your eye out. So we'll be back in a second with that. Alright, that's done. So like I said, you probably all already know this, but the easiest way to deal with these is just to kind of get them all together, twist them up into a circle, kind of like that, and then take the ends and just wrap them around a couple times. Because this won't ruin them. This is basically how they come in the package. But honestly, you should not be putting your strings back on after you've pulled them off to do a paint job like this. So, I mean, there's no point in trying to keep them straight or anything like that. It's just a matter of keeping them safe and making them easier to throw out so that you don't have to try and jam a bunch of strings into a bag or something. So that's it. Just wrap them around like that, and they're good to go. I'll chuck these in the garbage after. Alright, bridge, tailpiece, pretty straightforward. Lift the bridge off, pop the tailpiece off the back. If it's kind of being stubborn, you may just have to unscrew the pegs for it a little bit. Usually they're not on there very tight, but depends on who installed them, I guess. Give those a little unscrew job. Those come off. Unscrew the pegs that go into them. There does end up being a lot of parts when all's said and done on these things, doesn't there? Now, like I said before, the pickup covers here are matte finish. So I'm going to include them in my graphic. If you want to take them off, I mean, you all know how to take off pickup rings and covers. It's just a couple screws. Then you can tape around the pickup and tape it right into that cavity so that you don't have to actually remove the whole thing. Alternatively, you can remove the electronics if that is your preference. It's all kind of up to you and what you like to do. I've got set screws on my potentiometer knobs here, so I've got to undo those. And I'll just take the extra stuff off from around my switch here and tape it up a little bit, and that'll take care of that. So this screwdriver that I have, it's borderline impossible to get the bits out. Let me see here. There we go. Okay, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. So undo the set screw if you've got it, and if you do, they should just pop right off. If you don't have a set screw, use a shoelace, slide it underneath if they're the friction fit ones, and then pull it up and they'll pop off that way. Don't use a spoon. People use spoons occasionally. They're not great for the finish on the guitar, and on one like this with the metal, it's not a big deal, but if you get in there and use a spoon on one of the plastic ones, there's a reasonable chance that you're just going to break it. So maybe don't do that, Pretty straightforward logic on that one. Next up, we have the little nuts that hold the potentiometers in place. They tend to be 10, 11, 12 millimeter. Whatever the hell the conversion is for that in not metric. So you can buy from like stumac.com a fancy wrench thing to take those off, and you can pay a lot for it, or you can just use a friggin' wrench. Sorry, that irritates me that they're like, oh, this is the driver for this thing, and I'm like, that's a wrench. That's triple what a wrench should cost. Anyway, just use a wrench or a socket or something. I mean, you can do it with pliers. I wouldn't be buying those tools even if I did this every day. But it's not up to me. Select whatever works for you. So get those off of there. We're gonna undo carefully this back panel and pull those electronics through, and just keep track of which one's which. It's really pretty straightforward. But we're just gonna pull them through this side so it's easier to kind of tape everything off, and I don't have to worry about taping up the knobs and stuff themselves. This way I can just tape those holes from the back, and I don't have to worry about anything getting through into here and messing with the conductive paint or anything like that. Alright, so that's popped off of there. Just gonna gently pull this stuff through. I'm gonna take the rings from the backs of the potentiometers and put them in my bucket of parts here. And then I'm just gonna tape off the backs of those holes. Oh God. For some reason this thing has several washers on the back of the switch, which isn't a big deal. I suppose it's just because the wood probably was routed a little thinner in that area than usual. Alright, so that's all taped off from the back now, so I don't have to worry about any paint getting through there. Now to keep everything sealed up, I can just pop this back on here if I want. That's all the part removal that has to happen for me right now for this job. If you wanted to pull these studs out of here that your bridge and stop tail screw into, it's a fairly straightforward thing to do. You just get a bolt that is the exact same diameter and thread as the posts that go in there, and you make sure it's longer than them, long enough to contact the bottom and give you some room to spare. Then you tighten it in and gently tighten it all the way, and as it pushes against the bottom, instead of continuing to go down, it will pull those inserts up. Okay, so it'll pull them up and out of there, and then you can just take them off the bolt after. Make sure you've got a nice long bolt. For my purposes, that's completely unnecessary. I'm just going to make sure that when I do my pattern, those don't end up being gloss. So if you're looking for the easy way to do this, just don't include those in the pattern so that you don't have to paint over them. Leave them the way they are. So next up, I have two options here. I can either move on to sanding, scuffing, getting that ready, or I can go to taping. What I'm going to do is just gently do a little bit of scuffing on here to make sure that the whole surface is nice and matted out. If you don't want to mess with the matte finish that's on there already, then instead of doing this, you're going to go straight to taping, and then you're only going to do this on the parts that you are painting. But if you know what you're doing with one of these gray Scotch-Brite pads and you're working with a matte finish like this, generally speaking, you can do this without messing up your matte finish. If you've never done it before, your guitar is not a good place to try it out. Just go ahead and start taping. So I'm going to scuff this first, as you can see. I'm going to be careful of these posts so that I don't mess them up. It's pretty tough to screw something up too badly with one of these. If you're working with a gloss finish and you're putting matte on it or something like that, do not do this. Do not scuff first. Make sure in that case that you're doing the scuff work after. But there were already some glossed out spots on here just from being played so much. So I'm just kind of using this to also knock those back a little bit while I'm at it. And get this kind of evened out a little bit. Now I can clean it and move on to the tape. So just a little paper towel and some wax and grease remover. Don't have to go too crazy with it. You do have to make sure that it is nice and clean. Otherwise it can screw up your paint. Your new stuff won't stick properly. You could end up with bad reactions, contamination, all sorts of bad stuff. So make sure you do carefully clean your surface before you move on to painting it. Even if you haven't really done anything to it, I mean, you gotta sand, so you gotta pull off that sanding dust. You're probably gonna have touched it a few times, so you gotta pull off the grease from your hands and whatnot. Always worthwhile to make sure that you've gone in and cleaned it well, because it's not that difficult. It doesn't take very long. Alright, so I'm going to give that a minute to dry, and then we'll come back and start doing the masking work. When we go to tape this off, like I said, I'm only doing the top, so what I'm going to do is start by taping off the sides. And I like to just use relatively long strips of tape. Find my spot on that edge and run my thumb along that edge. and as I run my thumb along, I create that top edge, and then pushing the rest of the tape down is very straightforward after that. So if I start to stray away from the edge, I just rip off my tape, restart where I was kind of still on the track that I wanted to be on, and add another piece. It tends to take, you know, a few pieces of tape to get through the whole thing, especially if you're really trying to keep that line perfect, which, I mean, you should. There's no reason not to. It doesn't take that much more time, effort, or work. So yeah, it's gonna take a little while. I've got bevels on this one, so the line isn't, you know, it isn't even all the way around, which is fine. Just means I'm going to take a couple extra pieces of tape and work in slightly smaller sections. The smaller sections are easier to deal with, they're easier to keep straight, and you just have to make sure that the transitions between them are nice and smooth. Therein lies the challenge. Getting those nice smooth lines between the two of them so that you don't end up with, you know, these big notches in your paint job. So again, it's not particularly difficult. When you get up to the heel of the guitar and everything, you don't need to really do anything special, because obviously you're not going to be painting your neck. So from the fretboard on down, well, you can paint the back of the neck, sorry, but you're not going to be painting the fretboard. So from here on down, you can basically just tape up the whole thing, and that's a lot easier than having to play around with, you know, with taping all your edges. So here I can just run straight lines down from my fretboard, and I know that everything from there up is getting taped off regardless, particularly since I'm only doing the front face of this. Now I'll do that with a wider piece of tape, but these thinner ones are a little easier to control, so that's why I'm using them to do the bulk of the edge work here. Sorry, I hope you guys can hear me when I do that. I said that's why I'm using them to do the bulk of the edge work. I'm, as you may know, more accustomed to using a lapel microphone, and I've just switched, see, I'm doing it again, I've just switched to the camera mount microphone there. So I'm used to it not mattering at all what direction I speak in or anything like that. And with this change, hopefully I don't encounter too much of a transition period where you guys can't hear what the hell I'm saying. Hopefully I get it figured out relatively quick. If I don't, I apologize for that, but I will eventually break those habits, and if for some reason I can't, I will switch back to the lapel microphone. This gives me good sound quality, and it is faster and easier to set up. Doesn't require as much synchronization, and honestly, the less screwing around I have to do getting the sound sunk and everything afterward, the easier it is for me to put out videos, and the less likely it is that I'll be missing videos from my schedule. So this way I can get you guys more content, essentially. Anyway, you've kind of seen the gist of this. I'm going to finish taping up the edge, and then we'll come back and get to work on the face of it.